On Mother's Day, my own mother looked right at me in front of 40 guests and hissed, "I wish you were never my daughter. The military turned you into a heartless, cold-blooded monster." Something inside me broke. Quietly, sharply, too fast to even hurt. I am Lieutenant Colonel Grace Moore, 15 years in the military, sending every paycheck home to pay off this house, feeding the whole family only to get that in return. I didn't cry. Standing up straight, I calmly replied, "Then from now on, live as if you never gave birth to me." I turned on my heel, snatched the keys to the SUV under my name from my deadbeat brother's hand, and hit the gas. 10 minutes later, a text from my mother popped up. "Bring the car back right now or I'm calling the cops." I smiled coldly and typed exactly 2 words. "Call them." The absolute horror hit just 45 minutes later, when 3 patrol cars surrounded the house. Police sirens tore through the night, but the person wearing the handcuffs wasn't me. Before I tell you exactly what happened next, take a moment to like this video, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Stick around because the lonely drive I took that night finally woke me up to a horrifying truth. I flipped my phone face down on the passenger seat, completely ignoring the rapid-fire threat notifications lighting up the screen. The afternoon sun hit the windshield hard as I aggressively merged onto the interstate, putting raw physical distance between myself and a Mother's Day party funded entirely by my own credit card. Every appetizer on that table, every balloon taped to the porch railing, every single bottle of wine poured into crystal glasses for people who never thanked me. All of it came straight out of my checking account. The silence inside the cabin pressed against my eardrums, broken only by the low, steady hum of tires against asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white against the expensive leather. My brother David had picked that leather out himself at the dealership, swiping my card without even glancing at the price tag. I engaged tactical breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Forcing my elevated heart rate down the same way I had been trained to do under enemy fire. The realization was physically suffocating. I recognized how terrifyingly thin the line was between a loving, supportive home and a nest of absolute parasites. The people who were supposed to protect my back were the ones gleefully stabbing it. I pulled the heavy SUV onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly, and killed the engine. Leaning my head back against the headrest, I closed my eyes. The memories hit me like shrapnel piercing through a flak jacket. I vividly remembered the freezing night patrols in Kandahar, the constant shivering that sank deep into my bones while I scanned rooftops through thermal optics for 8 hours straight. I remembered the heavy rain mixing with blood in the medevac choppers, holding pressure on a 19-year-old corporal's shredded leg, while the rotors screamed above us, trying to keep him talking so he wouldn't go into shock. I remembered the endless missions where I wrote a goodbye letter in my head, because I genuinely didn't think I would make it back to base alive. The only thing keeping me alive during those freezing, blood-soaked nights was one desperate, burning hunger: to pull my family out of poverty. I wired every single hazard pay bonus, every cent of combat pay, directly to my mother's bank account. It was supposed to clear my brother David's suffocating debts. Instead, he used my blood money to tailor Italian silk suits and lease luxury cars he never deserved. While I was dodging mortar fire in a foreign desert, David was busy weaponizing my sacrifice. He was playing the role of a highly successful entrepreneur on my dime. He stripped his own sister's accounts bare to inflate his pathetic, fragile ego, treating my life-threatening deployments as his personal venture capital fund. He leased luxury sedans, hosted champagne dinners for business partners who didn't exist, built a flashy website for a company that had never earned a single dollar, and rented office space downtown just to impress strangers. Every cent that funded his delusion of grandeur was earned by me on my knees in the mud, thousands of miles from home, praying I would survive to see another sunrise. I sat alone in the quiet car and swallowed the bitter truth like dry sand. I tried to buy a smile, a word of praise from my mother with money, but what I got in return was an endless, bottomless extraction. I wasn't a daughter. I was a cash crop ready to be harvested the moment I stepped off the transport plane. I opened my eyes. The rigid military discipline finally overrode the pathetic civilian grief. In their eyes, I wasn't a human being with feelings or trauma. I wasn't a decorated officer who had earned every promotion through blood and sacrifice. I was a shiny, emotionless ATM machine designed to spit out cash on command. My mother pressed the button and out came the money. My brothers spent it and no one ever asked if the machine had a heartbeat. I reached forward, hit the ignition button, and shifted the car aggressively back into drive, my heavy combat boot pressing down on the gas pedal. The tears I expected to cry never fell. Instead, a freezing tactical clarity settled over my chest, hardening into impenetrable ice. I adjusted the rearview mirror, looking at my own cold, dead eyes staring back at me. I was heading straight back to the military base. The victim mentality died right there on the highway, somewhere between mile marker 42 and the base exit. Staring at the empty asphalt ahead, the red flags I had deliberately ignored for years suddenly became as sharp as combat knives. I recalled David standing in the driveway last Thanksgiving wearing a smug grin that made my stomach turn. He was swirling a glass of expensive bourbon bought with my card and patting the hood of this very SUV. He looked right at his snobby friends, a group of country club pretenders who thought he was some kind of self-made millionaire, smirked and declared, "This is my new ride." When they praised his incredible financial success, when they slapped his back and called him the real deal, he just soaked it up, puffing out his chest like a peacock in a borrowed cage. He never once corrected them. He never mentioned his sister's name. Not once. I had stood on the porch holding a cheap paper plate loaded with grocery store potato salad, entirely erased from my own achievement. The SUV that I bought with 14 months of combat zone pay, the vehicle that represented the most dangerous year of my life, was now a prop in my brother's theater of lies. I remember gripping that paper plate so hard the flimsy edge crumpled and I said nothing. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as my sister-in-law Chloe's shrill, grating voice echoed in my head. At a massive family reunion just months ago, she stood in the absolute center of the house I bought, waving her manicured hand around like royalty inspecting her castle. Extended family members crowded the living room, aunts, uncles, cousins I barely recognized, all nodding along as if they were witnessing something impressive. Chloe announced loudly to every single one of them, "This is my husband's ancestral home. I'm about to tear down the living room for better feng shui." My house, paid for with my literal blood and sweat, while my husband lay bleeding in a foreign country. Wait, I didn't even have a husband. I sacrificed everything for this family and didn't even have time for my own life. Suddenly, my property was transformed into their inherited empire, and I had just stood in the corner staring at the floor, picking at a loose thread on my sleeve, saying absolutely nothing. My jaw locked tight. I didn't correct her. I didn't speak up. I just watched my own property get claimed by a woman who had never worked a single day in her entire pampered life, a woman who thought the military was a 9-to-5 desk job. But the deepest, most lethal cut always came from my mother. I could vividly hear her sighing in irritation every single time a wire transfer cleared into her account. She would look at the bank receipt, hold it up between two fingers like it was something dirty, roll her eyes in disgust and sneer at me over the phone. "This little bit of money is nothing compared to an officer's salary. You have it easy in the military, only your brother struggles to take care of things at home." She weaponized my success, turning my grueling combat deployments into a paid vacation in her twisted narrative, while elevating David's chronic unemployment into heroic martyrdom. In her world, the child who bled for the country was the lazy one. The child who sat at home spending the bleeding child's money was the saint, the golden boy, the one who truly sacrificed. Every phone call ended the same way. A heavy sigh, a veiled insult, and the unspoken demand for more cash. I hit the brakes, pulling up to the heavily fortified gates of the military base. The bright floodlights washed over the windshield, and the familiar outline of the guard tower came into focus. I was furious, but the anger was directed squarely at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My cowardly silence, my desperate, pathetic need to be loved by a woman who didn't know how to love anything except money, that weakness was the perfect fuel to feed the parasites living in my house. My mother's psychological manipulation, pure unadulterated gaslighting, had convinced me that being financially drained was just the natural duty of a loyal, obedient child. I rolled down the window and flashed my military ID to the armed guard. He snapped a crisp salute. I saluted back, my jaw set like stone. The base gates opened with a mechanical groan and the familiar smell of diesel and concrete hit my nostrils. I drove through slowly, the tires rolling over the rumble strip at the entrance. The era of the silent ATM was officially terminated. Late that night, the heavy silence of my sparse officer quarters was violently shattered. My phone vibrated aggressively against the cheap wooden desk, buzzing so hard it rattled the empty water glass beside it. The screen illuminated the dark room with a cold blue glow that sliced through the blackness. It was an unknown local number. I sat up on my bunk, rubbed my eyes with the heels of my palms, and picked up the phone, pressing the cold glass to my ear. "More," I answered sharply out of pure habit, the same way I answered every call, whether it was a general or a pizza delivery. The stern, mechanical voice of a precinct dispatcher came through the static, completely devoid of emotion, reading from a script. "Excuse me, is this Grace Moore? We just received a stolen vehicle report from someone claiming to be the owner of the SUV you are currently holding." I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second, absorbing the words. The cold glass felt like a block of ice against my cheekbone. I swung my legs off the bunk and planted both feet flat on the cold concrete floor, my spine straightening automatically. The circus had officially begun. David actually had the absolute unmitigated audacity to report me to the authorities for stealing my own car. There were absolutely no limits to his bottomless stupidity, no floor beneath his shamelessness. He was perfectly willing to risk sending his own sister to federal prison, willing to see me court-martialed, stripped of my rank, and thrown into a military detention facility, just to save face in front of his mother and his fake friends. If the accusation stuck, my entire 15-year career would be incinerated. Every medal, every promotion, every sacrifice I had ever made would be erased by a felony conviction. The officer on the other end cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the reporting party is pushing for an immediate felony warrant. I need you to confirm the status of the vehicle right now." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't panic or cry. I regulated my breathing, straightened my posture as if I were standing at attention on the parade deck, and spoke with freezing, calculated precision. The same voice I used to give orders under fire, the same voice that had saved lives in combat zones. "Sir, I am Lieutenant Colonel Grace Moore, United States Marine Corps," I stated, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees with my rank alone. "I am currently holding the vehicle, and I didn't steal it from anyone because I am the sole legal owner of this vehicle." The officer hesitated on the other end of the line, the typing sound in the background stopping abruptly. The static crackled between us for a long beat. He was clearly caught off guard by my rank and my icy demeanor. "Colonel, the reporting party, Mr. David Moore, insists the vehicle belongs to him," he said, carefully treading lightly now, his tone shifting from authoritative to cautious. I cracked my knuckles one by one, each pop echoing in the empty room, staring blankly at the bare concrete wall of my quarters. "He is lying," I fired back, pulling open my laptop and booting up my encrypted drive with swift, practiced motions. The screen glowed bright in the dark room, casting sharp shadows across my face and the bare concrete walls. "I will email you digital copies of the original title, registration, insurance, and bill of sale right now. All of them bear only one name, Grace Moore." I navigated to the secure folder where I kept every important document I had ever signed, organized by year and category, the way the military trained me to manage critical records. I pulled the scanned title, the registration, the insurance policy, and the original bill of sale from the dealership, 4 documents that proved beyond any legal doubt that the vehicle belonged to me and only me. I attached them to a new email and hit send to the precinct's official address. The documents transmitted in under 3 seconds. The officer on the other end confirmed receipt, his voice noticeably quieter now. With a single decisive mouse click, David's arrogant accusation officially became the felony crime of filing a false police report. The same report that had triggered those 3 patrol cars to surround the house on Mother's Day night, the same report that put handcuffs on my brother, instead of me. I hung up the phone and set it down softly on the wooden desk. The room was silent again, but the silence felt different now. It felt clean. Like the silence after the last round of a firefight when the dust settles and you realize you are still breathing. It was time for the delusional golden child to taste the iron grip of the law. Early Monday morning, before the sun was fully up, I marched straight into the office of Colonel Richard Benson, the JAG officer, and my civil legal advisor. He had known me since I was a green, naive second lieutenant fresh out of officer candidate school, with stars in my eyes and blind loyalty in my heart. He had watched me rise through the ranks, had signed off on my deployments, and had been the closest thing to a father figure I had left in this world since my dad passed. He didn't offer a polite greeting or a cup of coffee that morning. He dropped a massive dossier onto his desk. Grace DOD Security just flagged your top secret clearance for financial anomalies, he ordered, his voice grim. I had to pull your credit report to stop them from revoking your access. Look at this. I flipped through the densely packed pages. Massive credit card debts. Luxury designer invoices from stores I had never set foot in. 5-star restaurant tabs running into the hundreds for a single meal. Spa treatments, jewelry purchases, golf club memberships, all swiped on the supplementary card I gave my mother strictly for groceries. David and Chloe had used it as a blank check to fund their entire lifestyle, and the total amount was staggering enough to make my vision blur. They are draining you to the bone. Grace. Colonel Benson said, his voice dropping into a stern, disappointed reprimand that cut right through my armor. Why do you let this continue? I lowered my head, my eyes locking onto the small framed photo of my late father, Arthur Moore, tucked behind my ID badge on the corner of the desk. He was wearing his old dress uniform in the picture, standing at parade rest, his jaw square and proud. A man of absolute integrity and unbreakable honor, who had worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and never once complained. He died of a heart attack when I was 23, 1 month before my first deployment. I never got to say goodbye. Staring at his face, at the hairline crack running down the glass of the old frame, I finally confessed my deepest, darkest fear to Benson. My voice shook slightly, betraying my rank and everything I had built. I'm afraid. I'm afraid if I stop paying, she will disown me. I'm afraid I'll lose my only family. Benson leaned forward, resting his heavy elbows on the desk, shaking his head with profound, heavy sympathy. He glanced at my father's photo, then back at me. Grace, buying affection with money isn't family. It's emotional blackmail. Your father would never tolerate this laziness and exploitation. Hearing my father's memory invoked with such brutal honesty felt like a physical slap to the face. I stared at the cracked corner of the photo frame, at the faded fabric of his uniform, in the image, at the quiet pride in his posture. The thick psychological fog that had clouded my brain for 15 years instantly cleared. Benson was completely right. My father had taught me to stand up to bullies, to hold my ground, to never let anyone strip me of my dignity. He worked himself to the bone at an auto repair shop and a night shift warehouse just to keep us honest. Yet here I was, his daughter, bankrolling the biggest bullies in my own life. I was paying them to humiliate me. I was funding my own erasure. I stared at my father's picture for a long, hard moment, my eyes tracing the faded sergeant's chevrons on his sleeve. A blinding light of realization hit me with the force of a freight train, enabling my brother's chronic laziness, his pathetic vanity, and my mother's toxic favoritism wasn't filial piety. It was a crime against my own blood. It didn't help David become a man. It stripped him of any ability to be a real, functioning adult. Every dollar I sent turned him into a weaker, more entitled, more delusional parasite. I was the one who had created this monster by feeding it. I took a deep tactical breath, completely discarding the last shred of my civilian weakness. I looked up, my eyes locked onto Benson's with lethal focus. The woman sitting across from him was no longer the scared little girl begging for her mother's love. I didn't hesitate. "Colonel, I'm done. I need to sever every financial artery tied to them." Colonel Benson didn't blink at my command. He immediately slid a secure desk phone toward me, hitting the speaker button with his thumb. The office instantly transformed into my personal command center, and the air in the room felt charged with the same electricity I felt before a major operation. I picked up the heavy receiver and dialed my bank's priority executive line. A recorded menu answered. I punched through the options, aggressively bypassing every automated prompt until a live operator picked up. "This is Grace Moore, account number ending in 4092. I stated, punching my secure PIN into the keypad. "I am the primary account holder. Freeze all supplementary credit cards tied to my primary account immediately. The cards held by Evelyn Moore and David Moore are to be permanently deactivated right now. Decline all pending transactions." The operator scrambled to comply, typing frantically in the background. I could hear the rapid clicking of her keyboard through the speaker, the sound of compliance. She read back the card numbers for confirmation. I confirmed every single one. Within 30 seconds, their entire financial lifeblood was severed. Every single card linked to my account went dark at the same moment, in every wallet, in every purse, at every register in the country. Somewhere across town, my mother was probably standing at a grocery checkout and her card was about to bounce. I hung up the phone. Benson nodded once, sharp and approving, and pulled out the next set of documents. I didn't stop to process the gravity of it. There was no time for second-guessing, no room for sentimentality. Benson spun his computer monitor around, displaying the DoD MillConnect portal on the bright screen. I logged into my service members' group life insurance policy, the SGLI, the policy that paid out $500,000 if I was killed in action. My mother and brother were listed as the primary beneficiaries. They would profit from my death. The thought hit me like ice water in the face. Delete them both. I commanded, clicking the edit button next to my listed beneficiaries. With 3 aggressive, echoing keystrokes, I struck my mother and brother from the list entirely. Their names vanished from the screen, replaced by a blinking cursor. If I fall on a foreign battlefield, they will not receive a single cent from my blood. I told Benson coldly, my eyes locked on the screen. I watched their names disappear for good, replaced instantly by the Wounded Warrior Project. A heavy, suffocating weight physically lifted off my shoulders for the first time in 15 years. Benson watched in silence, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. But the final lethal strike was the house. The property that Chloe proudly called her husband's ancestral home, the house she wanted to renovate with feng shui, the house where my mother hosted parties with my money and never once set a place for me at the head of the table. Legally, my name was the only one on the deed. I had paid off the mortgage entirely with combat zone tax-free earnings and hazard bonuses. Not a single penny of David's money, because he never had any, ever went toward a payment. Benson pulled a fresh stack of legal documents from his heavy desk drawer and slammed the stack on the mahogany surface. It was a formal 30-day notice to quit drafted by a civilian attorney I retained online that morning. "Sign here." He pointed his finger, tapping the dotted line firmly. I was officially taking back total control of my fully paid-off property. Benson explained the mechanics clearly. By signing this document, my civilian attorney would legally serve them with a non-negotiable 30-day eviction notice. The parasites would have to pack their bags and hit the curb, completely exposed to the real world with no safety net. No more free housing, no more free electricity, no more free life. I picked up the heavy metal pen. I felt the cold brass against my calloused fingers, the weight of the decision settling deep into my bones. Everything I had built with my combat pay, every brick of that house that represented a night I didn't sleep, a wound I didn't report, a letter I didn't send, all of it was being handed over to people who actually deserved it. I pressed the pen firmly to the paper. I signed page after page, my hand perfectly steady, not blinking once. For the first time in my entire life, I chose cold logic and justice over blind, toxic bloodlines. As I handed the massive stack of papers back to Benson, I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt absolute, unadulterated liberation. The war had just begun. If you agree that cutting off toxic family members is sometimes the only way to survive, hit that like button right now to let me know I'm not alone. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own brother tried to have you arrested for taking your own car? Make sure you keep watching, because when my family finally realizes their personal ATM is shut down forever, their reaction at the military base gates is absolutely priceless. Bad news travels faster than a desert sandstorm. By late Monday afternoon, my mother, David, and Chloe were completely losing their minds. The financial guillotine had dropped with surgical precision. Their cards were declining at every single register, creating massive public humiliation at the grocery store, the gas station, the hair salon, the drive-through window. The POS machine violently flashed, declined contact bank at the supermarket, forcing my mother to abandon a full cart of groceries, while the line of people behind her stared. David had just received a terrifying formal call from the local police department regarding his false felony report. The investigation was open. His arrest was pending. A detective wanted to schedule an interview. They didn't call my phone to apologize. They didn't send a single text admitting they were wrong. Instead, all three of them piled into a rented sedan and drove straight to the military base gates, abandoning any shred of remaining dignity, convinced they could scream their way back into my wallet. The armed guard at the main security checkpoint radioed my office, reporting 3 hysterical civilians making a massive, chaotic scene at the gate, screaming my name, demanding to see me, demanding the car, demanding the cash, demanding their old life back, threatening to call their congressman. I stood up from my desk, adjusted my cover with perfect precision, straightened my collar, and walked out into the corridor. I felt my heart rate drop to a steady 60 beats per minute. The fear that had controlled my entire life was completely gone. In its place was something I recognized from the battlefield: total command. I marched out of the compound gates, the afternoon sun hitting the polished brass of my insignias. I was fully dressed in my USMC combat utility uniform, perfectly squared away, radiating cold, untouchable authority. My boots crunched against the gravel with a measured, deliberate cadence, each step echoing like a drumbeat. The contrast was physically jarring. On one side stood a decorated Marine officer in perfect formation, spine straight, chin, level eyes dead ahead. On the other side stood 3 frantic, screaming civilians, clawing at the air like drowning rats, their faces twisted into masks of panic and rage. The second David saw me, he lunged forward, his face contorted in an ugly, red-faced fury. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest, completely unhinged. "What the hell did you do to my credit cards? Where is my car?" He spat, trying to physically intimidate me by invading my personal space, his spit landing on the gravel between us. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I stood my ground, my posture rigid, staring at him the way I would stare at a disgusting stain on the pavement. I let him scream, absorbing his pathetic weakness, while the heavily armed military police watched his every twitch from 10 feet away, hands resting on their holsters, ready to take him face down into the gravel at the first wrong move. I didn't waste my breath arguing with him. Words were useless against a man who had never earned a single one of his possessions, a man whose entire identity was built on stolen money and borrowed time. I simply raised a thick, heavy manila folder and slammed it hard against his chest, letting it fall to the dirt at his feet. Papers scattered across the gravel like dead leaves. Chloe, always desperate to know the financial situation, always the first to count the money, scrambled to the ground on her knees to pick up the scattered documents. Her manicured nails scraped against the dirty asphalt, snapping one of them clean off. They were copies of David's massive unpayable debt statements. Right on top sat the official 30-day notice to vacate drafted by my attorney. By handing it directly to him in front of armed military police, acting as my witnesses, he was legally served. Chloe's face drained of all color. Her hands shook violently as she read the words, her lips trembling. What? What is this? You sold our house? She stammered, looking up at me in absolute horror from her knees, her mascara already running. I stepped forward, closing the distance until my shadow fell across her face, my voice cutting through the wind like a sniper's bullet. My house. I enunciated clearly, correcting her delusional entitlement forever. And I have donated it. You have 30 days to pack your bags. Hearing that her free ride was permanently over, my mother lost whatever grip on reality she had left. She shrieked like a lunatic, her face twisting into something ugly and primal, clawing at the air in a desperate attempt to regain control. She grabbed at my sleeve, her bony fingers digging into the starched fabric hard enough to wrinkle it, trying to pull me toward her the way she always did when she needed money, when she needed her daughter to fold and submit and hand over the checkbook. You ungrateful wretch, I carried you in my womb. How could you throw your own mother and brother out on the street? She wailed, the veins in her neck bulging, trying to summon the ghost of motherly love to break my defenses. The same guilt trip she had used 1,000 times before. The same emotional weapon she had sharpened and perfected over 40 years of relentless practice. David stood behind her, his face drained white, the papers still scattered at his feet, too stunned to speak. I stared directly into my mother's eyes and I felt absolutely nothing. The little girl who begged for her love, who sent every dollar home from a combat zone, who wrote letters that were never opened and left voicemails that were never returned. That little girl was dead and buried somewhere in the Afghan desert. I silenced my mother's screaming with a final lethal strike delivered with the same cold precision I used to issue orders under fire. From now on, you have your precious golden son to rely on. You always wished I was as dutiful as him. Right now, let him feed you. I am no longer this family's bank. I turned to the military police. Detain him and contact the local precinct. There is an active felony warrant for a false police report under his name, I ordered. I walked away as the MPs slammed David against the hood of the rental car, cuffing his wrists. My boots crunched steadily on the gravel. I did not look back. Not once. Between Wednesday and Saturday of that same week, the chain reaction began to shred their lives. Without my financial IV drip constantly funding his lifestyle, David's entire existence crumbled to dust. His remaining personal cards were rejected at every high-end restaurant and supermarket. The fake business partners, the ones he wined and dined with, my money vanished into thin air the second they realized he was a broke parasitic fraud who never had $1 of his own. His so-called friends stopped returning his calls by Thursday. The country club revoked his guest membership by Friday. The leasing company repossessed his personal car on Saturday morning while his neighbors watched through their blinds. Reality was tearing his fake empire apart piece by piece, and I didn't have to lift a single finger to help it along. He was finally experiencing the real world without his sister's wallet as a shield. The phone in my quarters kept ringing off the hook. Aunt Karen and Uncle Frank, the nosy extended family who loved to gossip and judge from the comfort of their living room, but never once offered to help with a single bill, called to scream at me. "You are a cold-blooded, unfilial monster," Aunt Karen yelled through the receiver, her voice cracking with self-righteous fury. The same woman who had never once sent me a care package during deployment. I sat on my bunk sipping a cold glass of water and calmly replied, "You are absolutely right. I am terrible. So please, Aunt and Uncle, take David and Mom into your home and provide for them." The line went dead silent for 3 full agonizing seconds. I could hear Uncle Frank whispering something in the background. "Well, we don't have the space. I have to go check the oven." Aunt Karen stammered hastily, hanging up before I could say another word. Morality is always cheap until people have to pay for it themselves. Their righteous anger evaporated the instant it came with a price tag. Chloe, the pragmatic, gold-digging sister-in-law, finally woke up from her grand delusion. When she realized her husband was literally a penniless beggar with 0 assets, no car, no house, no credit. Her entire world collapsed, like a house built on sand. She secretly called my personal cell late one night, sobbing hysterically into the speaker, her voice cracking between gasps. She sobbed so hard she choked on her own breath. "I didn't know, Grace. I swear to God I didn't know," she wailed. "He told me the business was booming. He told me all that money was his." I listened in complete silence for 30 seconds, offering no comfort, no reassurance, no warmth. I ended the call without saying a single word. Her tears didn't move me. They were just the product of an empty bank account, not genuine remorse. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry it stopped working. I didn't gloat. I stayed on base drinking bitter black coffee with Master Sergeant Sullivan in the break room and listening to the quiet, moral guidance of Chaplain Michael, a man who had seen more broken soldiers than I could count. I sat back in the plastic chair, letting the harsh fluorescent light hum above my head, and listened to the distant rhythmic sound of recruits running drills outside. Their boots hit the pavement in unison, a sound that had been the soundtrack of my entire adult life. The shouting of the drill instructor echoed faintly through the walls. I watched the theatrical family drama destroy itself against the anvil of harsh reality without any intervention from me. The truth was the ultimate punisher. I didn't need to fire another shot or raise my voice again. The consequences of their own greed, their own laziness, their own decades of exploitation were suffocating them. A few weeks passed. It was a Sunday night, and the 30-day eviction deadline was looming incredibly close, just days away. There was a desperate, heavy knock on the door of my off-base rental apartment. 3 sharp bangs that rattled the thin wooden frame, followed by silence, then 3 more. I set down my coffee mug, walked to the door, and opened it. David and my mother were standing there in the freezing cold night air. There was no arrogance left. No Italian silk, no designer shoes, no smirks, no demands, no fingers pointed at my chest. They looked ragged, broken, driven into a terrifying corner by ruthless debt collectors who didn't care about family drama or golden children. My mother's coat was cheap and thin, her hair unwashed and pulled into a messy knot. David's eyes were red and sunken, his cheeks hollow, his clothes wrinkled and stained. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, letting the punishing silence stretch as they shivered on the porch, waiting for me to speak. I offered no welcome. My mother tried to play her old cards, weeping loudly, grabbing my sleeve, and trying to summon the ghost of motherly love to shatter my defenses. Her tears rolled down her cheeks in heavy streams, but her eyes kept darting past me into the apartment, scanning for any sign of cash or comfort she could leverage. I had seen that look 1,000 times, but the real shock came from David. The former golden child, the self-proclaimed entrepreneur, the man who used to puff his chest and claim my possessions as his own, suddenly collapsed onto my floor. He fell to his knees first, then crumpled forward onto his side, his body folding like something hollow and broken. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed uncontrollably, his shoulders heaving with violent, ugly cries that shook his entire frame. He slammed his fist against the floorboards, his voice cracking violently. "I hate it," he screamed through his tears. "I hate your damn uniform. I hate every single medal on your chest. I hate that Purple Heart. Because every time you walk into a room, everybody looks at you with respect. And I'm 40 years old and I'm nothing without you." His luxury suits were just armor to hide his own failure. His fake business was just a costume to cover the crushing shame of being 40 years old and completely dependent on his younger sister. Looking at those desperate, regretful tears, my heart ached. I felt the old pull, the familiar, suffocating urge to reach for my wallet to write a check to fix everything the way I always had, the way my father would have wanted me to. But my resolve was forged in iron, tempered by 15 years of military discipline and a lifetime of being used and discarded. I refused to hand over a blank check. I refused to open my wallet the way I used to, knowing it would only poison him further, knowing it would restart the entire vicious cycle of dependency and entitlement that had destroyed us all. I would not enable him to remain a child in a man's body. I stepped away from him, forcing him to stay on the floor and face his own ruin without my hand pulling him up. I looked down at him and offered one final brutal lifeline, stripped of any warmth or tenderness. I will pay exactly one emergency debt for you so the two kids don't end up on the street. I commanded, my voice echoing off the bare walls of the apartment. But on one condition: you must sign a contract to work as a bricklayer, a mechanic, or enlist in the military. Any manual labor to earn your own money. And Mom, you must move into a cheap rental and live on your pension. My mother opened her mouth to protest, her lips already forming the word ungrateful, and I raised a single finger to silence her. She closed it. David looked up at me from the floor, his face streaked with tears and snot, and nodded slowly. It was the harshest form of love I had ever delivered, crueler than any order I had given in combat, harder than any decision I had made under fire. I was forcing them to burn to ashes so they could finally learn how to rebuild themselves from the ground up. There was no negotiation. There was no discussion. I closed the door, walked back to my kitchen table, and sat down alone in the quiet apartment, listening to their footsteps fade down the stairwell. 1 year later. David didn't wear Italian silk suits anymore. His skin was deeply tanned from months of brutal sun exposure. His hands were calloused hard and permanently stained with motor oil that no amount of scrubbing with industrial soap could remove. He was driving a beat-up pickup truck with a cracked windshield and a rusted-out tailgate to his job on a construction site, pouring concrete foundations and hauling lumber 6 days a week. The delusions of grandeur were entirely dead, replaced by the quiet, steady gaze of a man who actually fed himself and his 2 kids with his own grueling labor. He was tired. His back ached constantly. His knees were shot from kneeling on concrete all day. But he was finally real. He had stopped pretending to be something he wasn't. He looked 10 years older and 100 years more honest. My mother had changed too. She learned how to navigate grocery aisles with discount coupons, carefully counting her change at the checkout counter, comparing store brands with reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. The toxic, bitter insults that used to pour from her mouth like battery acid had vanished, entirely replaced by a cautious, profound respect for every single dollar she spent. She knew the price of bread, the price of milk, the price of dignity. We didn't have family dinners in 5-star restaurants on my dime anymore. We sat on plastic chairs in the backyard of a cramped rental apartment, eating cheap grilled pork over a rusty charcoal pit. No showing off to the neighbors, no lies, no designer wine glasses, no grand performances. Just survival. Just the smell of cheap charcoal smoke, and the sound of meat sizzling on a dirty grate, and a family learning how to be honest for the first time. I walked into that small yard wearing my newly pinned Colonel insignias. The silver eagles glinted faintly in the late afternoon light. I stood there quietly smiling as I watched my brother sweat over the hot coals, flipping the pork with a pair of bent metal tongs, grease popping against his forearms. His arms were thick now, corded with real muscle earned from real work, a body built by labor instead of tailored to fit a lie. My mother looked up at me as I approached, setting down a paper plate on the wobbly plastic table. The deep-seated resentment was completely gone from her eyes. In its place was a shy, silent gratitude that she never knew how to put into words. She didn't apologize. She didn't say she was proud of me, but she pulled out a chair and wiped it clean with her sleeve before I sat down. She poured me a glass of iced tea from a plastic pitcher without being asked. I didn't need her praise anymore. The quiet, peaceful silence was enough. We were finally a family stripped of all the financial poison. I took a deep breath of the smoky air and listened to the wind rustle through the small, overgrown yard. A dog barked somewhere down the street. David's 2 kids chased each other around the plastic table, laughing at something only they understood. I finally understood the absolute greatest lesson of my entire life. Stopping the rescue of a person is sometimes the most profound way to love them. Cutting off a toxic lifeline is the only way to resurrect a human soul. Dignity cannot be provided or inherited. It must be earned with blood, sweat, and tears. And for the first time in my life, standing in that cheap backyard watching my brother earn his own meal and my mother count her own pennies, I was finally at peace. If my journey gave you the courage to stand up and reclaim your own dignity, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I want to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, what was the hardest boundary you ever had to set with your own family?